ever get that feeling? Like, there's always that one person on your team, right? Always has to point out the potential problems. Every new idea, every project, they're the ones raising concerns, asking a million questions.
Oh, totally. The classic squeaky wheel,
Yeah.
always needing a bit of grease. I think we've all encountered someone like that at some point in our careers.
Yeah, and it's easy to kind of just brush them off sometimes, right? You're focused on getting things done, moving forward, and they seem to just throw up roadblocks.
Definitely. Especially when you're feeling excited about a project or a new direction. It's human nature to kind of want to avoid that negativity or what seems like negativity.
Exactly. But what if we've got it all wrong? What if those very people, the ones who seem to always be playing devil's advocate, are actually the ones offering some of the most valuable insights? The ones who can help us avoid major pitfalls?
Now, that's an interesting thought. You're making me rethink my whole approach to those squeaky wheels.
Well, that's precisely what we're diving into today. We're taking a look at a super intriguing piece from Phoenix Performance Partners called The Canary Leader's Need. And it really challenges us to shift our perspective on these individuals.
The Canary leaders need. Okay, I'm already hooked by the title alone. That immediately brings to mind a powerful image, doesn't it? Like the canaries they used to use in coal mines.
It absolutely does. And that's precisely the analogy the article uses, suggesting that these, what we often perceive as problem employees, might actually be functioning just like those canaries.
So like an early warning system,
Yeah.
basically. Detecting dangers that others might miss.
Exactly. They're the ones who might be picking up on those subtle cues, those early signs of trouble that the rest of us are just too busy or maybe too optimistic to see. It's like that old mining adage. The first to notice the danger signs are often labeled troublemakers.
Makes you think, doesn't it? We might be unintentionally silencing the very voices that could help us avoid disaster. So in this deep dive, are we basically going to be exploring how to kind of reframe our thinking around these individuals?
That's exactly it. We'll explore how to identify these, let's call them organizational canaries, understand why their warnings are so often dismissed, and then dive into some practical strategies like this really fascinating technique they call the responsibility flip.
Okay, responsibility flip. I'm all ears. Sounds intriguing. But first, can we unpack that canary in the coal mine analogy a bit more? I mean, I get the basic idea, but for anyone who might not be familiar with the history, why were canaries so crucial in those old mining environments?
Right. So think of it this way. Back in the day, coal mines were incredibly dangerous places, right? Full of potential hazards. One of the biggest dangers was the presence of toxic gases, things like carbon monoxide. But the problem was these gases were often completely odorless and colorless.
So the miners wouldn't even know they were in danger until it was too late.
Exactly. That's where the canaries came in. Canaries, being much smaller and having a much faster metabolism than humans, were far more sensitive to these toxic gases.
Gotcha. So they'd be affected by the gases much quicker than the miners.
Precisely. So the miners would take these canaries down into the mines with them in cages. And if a canary suddenly stopped singing or showed any signs of distress, that was an immediate, critical warning for the miners. It meant there was a dangerous gas leak and they needed to get out fast.
Wow, that's actually pretty incredible. So it wasn't that the bird was trying to be difficult or negative. It was simply reacting to a real life-threatening danger in the environment.
Exactly. It was a purely biological response, a survival mechanism, if you will. And in turn, it became this vital safety tool for the miners.
And the article is suggesting that there are parallels to this in our modern workplaces, that some employees might be acting like those canaries, picking up on those early warning signs of danger, those potential problems that others just aren't seeing.
Precisely. And according to Phoenix Performance Partners, these organizational canaries can manifest in all sorts of ways.
So what are some of those telltale signs? How do these canaries typically show up in a company setting?
Well, for example, they might be the first to question whether a new initiative actually has the resources or the support it needs to truly succeed. They might point out potential ethical dilemmas or gray areas in a proposed strategy. They might be the ones who notice when team morale starts to dip, maybe before it becomes a widespread problem.
So they're kind of like the canaries in the coal mine of team dynamics and organizational change.
Exactly. And sometimes they can also be incredibly attuned to those early signs of customer dissatisfaction, those little hints of trouble that haven't yet made their way into formal feedback channels.
It's like they have this radar for potential problems, for those weak signals that most of us just filter out. So it's not so much about negativity, but more about this heightened sensitivity to risk, to things that could go wrong.
Right, they're often thinking several steps ahead, trying to anticipate those potential pitfalls. And that brings us to a really crucial question. If these individuals are potentially so valuable, offering these early warnings, why do we so often dismiss them? Why do we label them as negative or difficult?
Yeah, it's like we're almost programmed to shut down those dissenting voices, even when they might have a valid point. Why is that?
Well, there's actually a lot of psychology behind it.
Mm.
When we're excited about a project or we've invested time and energy into a particular plan, hearing someone constantly raise concerns can trigger what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. It's basically this mental discomfort we feel when we're confronted with information that contradicts our existing beliefs or desires.
So rather than actually grappling with the concern itself, it's easier to just dismiss the source of that discomfort, the person raising the issue.
Precisely. It's like our brains are trying to protect our positive outlook, our enthusiasm, by creating this filter that blocks out anything that challenges it.
And the article mentions that there's actually research that backs this up, or something about how employees who voice concerns are often perceived negatively, even when their concerns turn out to be valid.
Exactly. They cite a study from the Academy of Management Journal, done back in 2013. It found that employees who spoke up about problems in their organizations were often seen by their managers as less loyal.
Wow, talk about a catch-22. You speak up to try and help the organization, and you end up being seen as disloyal.
Yeah, it creates this dangerous dynamic where the very people who could be helping to prevent problems are the ones who are most likely to be silenced or marginalized.
So it's like we're essentially shooting the messenger, the canary in the coal mine, instead of actually paying attention to the warning they're giving us.
Exactly. It's counterintuitive, but it seems to be a pretty common pattern in organizations. So the big question then becomes, how do we break this cycle? How do we start to see these individuals not as problems, but as the valuable assets they can be?
Well, the article emphasizes the importance of a conscious shift in perspective. It's about actively choosing to see these individuals through a different lens, to reframe our thinking.
Okay, so instead of automatically slapping a negative label on them, what are some alternative ways to view their behavior?
The article offers some really helpful reframes. For example, instead of calling someone a complainer, we could think of them as an early warning system.
I like that. So it's about focusing on the potential value of their input rather than just the perceived negativity.
Exactly. And someone who we might typically label as resistant to change could actually be a guardian of organizational wisdom. They might be drawing on past experiences, highlighting potential pitfalls that others might not be aware of.
So their resistance could actually be a form of valuable institutional knowledge.
Right. And the article goes on to suggest that an anxious worrier might be better understood as a risk detection specialist, someone who's highly attuned to potential threats. And someone we perceive as a negative influence might in fact be a protective voice, someone who's genuinely trying to prevent future problems.
So it's about actively choosing a more positive and potentially more accurate interpretation of their actions. But how do we actually put this reframing into practice? What are some tangible steps that leaders or anyone working on a team can take to tap into the wisdom of these canaries?
Well, the article provides some really practical strategies. And the first, and maybe the most important, is to cultivate the skill of listening with genuine curiosity. Instead of getting defensive when someone raises a concern, try asking open-ended questions. Questions designed to truly understand their perspective.
So what are some examples of those kinds of questions?
The article suggests things like, what specifically are you seeing that others might be missing? Or, help me understand what risks you're identifying. It's about digging deeper into their reasoning, trying to see the world through their eyes.
It's about shifting from a reactive stance to a more inquisitive one, right?
Right.
Really trying to learn from their perspective.
Exactly. And another key recommendation is to create dedicated safe spaces for people to voice concerns constructively. This could be in the form of regular team meetings, where it's explicitly stated that raising potential problems is not only acceptable, but actually encouraged.
So it's about fostering a culture of psychological safety, where people feel comfortable speaking up without fear of retribution.
Right. And it's also important to validate the courage it takes to voice concerns, especially in environments where those concerns might have been dismissed in the past. Publicly acknowledging the value of that feedback can go a long way in encouraging more of it.
So actively creating an environment where those canaries feel safe to sing.
Precisely. And the article also makes a really important point about separating the message from the delivery. Sometimes the way a concern is voiced might not be ideal. It might come across as overly negative or critical. But in those situations, leaders can try to focus on the substance of the concern while also offering coaching and guidance on how to communicate more effectively in the future.
So, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Exactly. And here's a really interesting suggestion. The article proposes actually tracking the hit rate of these organizational canaries.
Hit rate. What do you mean by that?
Basically, noticing how often their early warnings actually materialize into real problems. Are they consistently flagging issues that turn out to be significant? Over time, this can build a pretty strong case for the value of their insights, even if those insights aren't always delivered in the most polished way.
That's a really tangible way to demonstrate their contribution to the team. But I think a crucial point here is how do we distinguish between these truly valuable canaries and someone who's just a chronic complainer?
Oh yeah, that's a really important distinction. Not every vocal employee is a valuable canary, and the article outlines some key differences. One is whether the person raising the concern also tends to offer potential solutions or alternatives.
So are they just pointing out problems or are they actively contributing to finding solutions?
Exactly. True organizational canaries are often invested in improving things. They might have ideas about how to address the issues they're raising. Chronic complainers, on the other hand, might be more focused on simply identifying problems without necessarily wanting to be part of the solution.
That's a helpful differentiator. What are some other things to look for?
Another important factor is the scope of their concerns. Are they primarily focused on personal grievances, or are they consistently raising issues that affect the wider team or the organization as a whole? Valuable canaries tend to focus on those bigger systemic issues.
So it's about whether their concerns are self-serving or whether they're coming from a place of genuine concern for the well-being of the team or the company.
Right. And finally, the article touches on their overall orientation. True canaries generally have a genuine desire for the organization to succeed and improve. Their concerns stem from that desire for better outcomes,
Yeah.
not just from a place of general negativity or resistance to all forms of change.
So it's about looking at the intent behind their words, their overall attitude towards the organization.
Exactly. And for those individuals who do seem to fall more into the chronic complainer category, the article suggests providing direct and constructive coaching.
So how might that coaching look?
Well, the focus should be on helping them learn how to articulate their concerns more constructively and how to actively participate in the problem-solving process. It's about setting clear expectations around the difference between simply complaining and actually contributing to positive change.
It's about empowering them to become part of the solution rather than just highlighting the problem.
Precisely. And that brings us to that intriguing technique we mentioned earlier, the responsibility flip.
Okay, I'm ready for the big reveal. What exactly is this responsibility flip?
It's incredibly simple, but it can be really effective. Basically, when someone raises a concern, you ask them this one question. What role would you like to play in addressing this issue?
That's it, just one question.
That's all it takes,
Hmm.
because that one question immediately shifts the dynamic of the conversation. It helps you quickly differentiate between someone who's genuinely interested in finding a solution and someone who just wants to complain without taking any ownership.
I can see how that would be powerful. It forces them to think beyond just identifying the problem and to actually consider how they can contribute to solving it.
Exactly. And the beauty of it is it often leads to a more collaborative and productive conversation. And that's really the core message of this whole article. It's about recognizing the potential value of these organizational canaries, these individuals who might not always be the easiest to deal with, but who can offer us incredibly valuable insights.
It's about shifting our perspective from seeing them as annoyances to seeing them as potential assets.
Right. And the article highlights the competitive advantage that leaders can gain by learning to truly listen to these individuals. By paying attention to those early warnings, organizations can proactively address problems while they're still manageable, preventing them from escalating into full-blown crises.
It's like a form of early risk management, leveraging the unique sensitivity of these individuals to potential threats. And the article ends with a really thought-provoking question for the listener. The next time you feel frustrated by that team member who seems to always spot the cloud in every silver lining, pause and consider, are they simply being difficult, or are they your most valuable early warning system?
It's such a powerful reminder that the people who are most attuned to potential problems might actually be providing us with incredibly valuable intelligence.
So the takeaway here is don't be so quick to dismiss those voices of dissent. They might just be the key to avoiding major pitfalls and achieving greater success.
Absolutely. And the article even offers a try this today challenge. Identify one of those individuals in your own team or organization, someone you might have labeled as a problem employee.
And then what?
Schedule a quick one-on-one conversation with them. Go in with a genuine desire to understand their perspective, to listen and learn. Ask them about the issues they're seeing, and, importantly, what role they see themselves playing in addressing those issues.
It's about turning that annoyance into an opportunity for growth, both for you as a leader and for the organization as a whole.
Exactly. And who knows, that squeaky wheel might not just be demanding grease. They might be signaling a critical crack in the very foundation of your organization, a crack that you wouldn't have noticed without their warning.
It's food for thought, isn't it? How many crises or missed opportunities might we have avoided if we had truly listened to those who dared to speak up early on? Maybe that seemingly negative voice is actually your most valuable, albeit unconventional, early warning system.
Maybe it's time we start listening a little more closely.
Maybe it is.